If you were to take a walk in a very specific area of northern Mauritania, which looks like this, you would hardly even think that you are in a very special place. Hundreds of kilometers of endless wasteland and harsh terrain cannot be easily traversed. It is a secret, and for thousands of years, no one actually knew that this place hides a very interesting past. At first, this part of the sugary piece is something special, but all of that changed when a man found himself in the air for the first time, at 20, in the century, and looked down at the ground. And this vast wasteland revealed its first secret, a mysterious circular structure of enormous dimensions that can even be seen from space. Today we are talking about the Richat Structure, a structure that carries a far more well-known name, which is around the Sahara Desert, making learning centuries more numerous. Authors and researchers are trying to find and uncover archaeological remains of what is still officially known as the Mids of Atlantis. Few of you have not heard of this ancient kingdom that spanned across multiple continents. This was an incredible place where half humans, half gods supposedly lived, who ruled the Atlantic Ocean, Africa, and Europe, and a people who had numerous colonies all over the planet. God, finally, let's say, it comes right from this place. A civilization that disappeared in a single day, one night. One enormous cataclysm and flood that wiped this place off the face of the earth. And will turn out from our history, there are dozens of possible locations around the world that some people believe are precisely the places where Miska Atlantis was located. Asterisk. None of these places has the main characteristics that are almost identically described by the oldest source of this story, which is Plato nearly 2,400 years ago. And this place is precisely this place, around the Sahara. And today, you will see why some people believe that this place is the most likely location of this Misk kingdom. In several old videos, I talk about the classical history of the research of Atlantis and where this story draws its roots from. This is of course the Greek philosopher Plato who transmitted a story nearly 300 years old from Solon, who in turn learned of this story from Egyptian priests during his travels in Egypt. That story was actually a historical fact for the ancient Egyptians, dating back thousands of years. Today we will focus precisely on this historical site, around the Sahara and Larija. The structure is today considered a natural elliptical geological formation, created by volcanic activity, or as suggested by some other research, the impact site of some celestial body. The diameter is as much as 40 kilometers and consists of several separate circular structures. And it was actually discovered for the first time by Western researchers in the 20th century. Her age is estimated according to modern scientific research to be around 100 million years. According to all available scientific data, this place really looks like a possible natural formation, although it is quite unusual in such dimensions on this planet. What naturally led to the rejection of the claim by some people that this is actually the place where the Misk Atlantis was located? No. Although this is really a possible natural structure, it still does not mean that Atlantis may have actually been located in this place. Atlantis, which was actually built in ancient times with new natural concentric structures. And the reason why some people believe that this is the location of Atlantis is incredibly similar to the descriptions of Plato, who wrote this almost 2,400 years ago. Atlantis was not actually just a city as it is often portrayed. It was actually an island state originally named Island of Atlas, and Atlas was the powerful ruler of Atlantis, just as the Roman Empire, for example, was of course not just Rome, but much more than that. So Atlantis was actually a huge island kingdom with a specific city. The center, which Plato described Atlantis, was an island that mostly consisted of mountains in the northern parts and along the coast. And it encompassed a large plain of elongated shape in the south that stretched 3,000 stadia in one direction, which is about 555 kilometers. The center of the interior was about 2,000 stages, which means about 370 kilometers. 50 stadia, 9 kilometers from the coast, there was also a mountain that was low on all sides, separating Atlantis into several parts of the island. The central island itself measures 5 stadia in diameter. Plato even describes the origin of this specific city of Minsk, how it was actually built and divided by gods. Plato fell in love, the daughter of Euaner and Louisa, who gave birth to 5 pairs of male twins. The oldest of them, named Atlas, was proclaimed the legitimate king of the entire island and ocean, named the Atlantic Ocean in his honor. He received the mountain of his birth and the surrounding area as a feud. Today, this above in this area is called Atlas, just as the entire ocean is called the Atlantic Ocean. Atlasov twin Gedarius received the farthest part of the island according to the Pillars of Hercules. The other 4 pairs of twins also received dominion over many people and a large territory. He has settled on the mountain where his love lived, carved it into a palace, and enclosed it with 3 circular moats, all of increasing width, varying from 1 to 3 stages. They were separated by fingers of the earth of proportional size. The Atlanteans then built bridges over the northern mountain, creating a path to the island's Statka. They dug a large canal to the sea and carved tunnels into the stone rings under the bridges so that ships could pass into the city around the mountain. They fortified the docks with rock walls. Every passage into the city was guarded with gates and towers, and walls surrounded every ring of the city. The walls were built of red, white, and black stone, extracted from this excavation, and were covered with brass, tin, or a noble metal called orichalc. As you can see, Plato here quite precisely described the location and appearance of this mythical city, as well as the kingdom, and said that it is located to the west beyond Libya, and that it was larger than Libya and Asia combined. Of course, he meant Asia Minor here. This island is located behind the Pillars of Hercules, which was the last boundary of the then known world, the exit between Gibraltar and North Africa to the Atlantic Ocean. We even have a second border, and that is of course the Atlantic Ocean. We have a story about Atlas, after which the mountain range is named, i.e. a mountain range in North Africa. And as the icing on the cake in this very area of North Africa, we also have a mysterious structure that irresistibly resembles Plato's descriptions of what Atlantis actually looked like. These are very specific descriptions of the city, for which he even said that it is in the south, 3,000 stadia away from the coast of the Atlantic Ocean in one direction. Once again, look at the wonders. The structures are located at almost identical distances from the Atlantic Ocean, which is about 555 kilometers in today's measurements. Why modern science and archaeology, considering all these possible traces? And I have only mentioned part of them in today's video, and I will elaborate on something later. The persistence was also the very thought that this is actually a possible location of Atlantis. But first, even if we disregard the story of some mythical gods, demigods with some incredible powers who ruled this place and the alleged place of great power, even if these were exaggerations, there really was some kind of civilization that lived in this place, but a civilization that had absolutely no advanced technologies. Modern science always has enormous problems accepting such things, due to the time when Atlantis existed and the time when it was destroyed. And Plato was here transmitting ancient Egyptian records, very precise, incredibly precise. Plato said that Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before his time. Given that Plato lived almost 2,400 years ago, we arrive at a total age of 11,400 years, and this is a very significant number. Modern science has enormous problems with such a number, as it believes that at that time there was no civilization at all, especially not a civilization as developed as described by Plato. Here we have another problem, because Plato described Atlantis as a huge island and a group of islands off the western coast of Libya. As you can see, today around the Richat Structure, at the site of today's Sahara, we have no island, but a solid landmass of Africa. What if he said that at that very time, almost 12,000 years ago, this part of West Africa was separated from the rest of today's Sahara by a huge river named Taman Rasset? And this is not any kind of speculation, some mythological story, but a scientific fact that was discovered in 2015, years via the Japanese satellite. And this is what the official internet bulletin says, which means it doesn't get more mainstream than what you are about to hear. Rasset Park was identified as a possible location for an ancient Saharan civilization, solely based on comparisons with similar contemporary river systems and their associated civilizations. The existence of the Taman Rasset River location was confirmed by scientists only in 2015. although the expedition is in search of oil in 2003. Years ago, I found the Capti Miras Canyon, which most likely formed by the flow of freshwater full of sediment from this river system. Currently, there's no evidence of any former civilization or agricultural community dating back to the time when the river was present. So, these are literally statements from Wikipedia. This ancient and enormous river was at times in canyons up to 3 kilometers deep, and in some parts, as far as we know so far, it was even to 0.5 kilometers wide. This river could actually easily have created the eastern boundary of Atlantis, separating Atlas Mountains in the north and the Atlantic Ocean in the west. Do I even need to mention that the Richat Structure is located along part of this ancient riverbed? Have you noticed a very large and very precise similarity in the years I have mentioned so far? When Atlantis disappeared, do you know how long ago today's North Africa was actually a green, very fertile area intersected by rivers, cities, and huge lakes, and that only the largest in the world? All of this happened about 11,000 to 12,000 years ago. Even today, there are geographical maps from the first European explorers and navigators who depicted Africa and the Sahara, which at that time was already well covered by huge layers of sand, as a green and fertile area full of water. I have spoken in detail about this on the YouTube channel Bright Insight, which has dedicated all its work to uncovering such mysteries. You have my warm recommendation for this video with much more detail about these old geographical maps that show something that already at that time did not exist. And today, through modern significant research, we reliably know that the north of Africa really looked like this. The only possible explanation for all these old maps from the Middle Ages is, considering their accuracy in relation to the rest of the world, that someone was copying maps from much older sources and older maps from North Africa. The similarities between river systems and zeros are truly astonishing when compared to modern research. Plato described Atlantis as a very powerful kingdom, located right at this location in northwest Africa, which at that time certainly functioned as an island with a capital of a specific appearance. The kingdom that had numerous colonies in the Atlantic Ocean, Europe, and extended all the way to present-day Egypt. As this area was before 12,000 years did not look like today. The Egyptian chronicles speak of a people and an advanced civilization from the east, and a civilization that was the first to settle in Egypt. The first pharaohs came from this mining site, and they created the Egyptian civilization. What is the Richat Structure in West Africa, leading 4,300 kilometers east to the famous Giza Plateau? The Sphinx and the pyramids, the buildings that, according to these stories, were built by those very same demigods, gods who came from the distant west. You have one single attempt to guess when a huge water erosion occurred for them, which is clearly visible at the foot of today's Sphinx, and the sediments visible on the pyramids. I think it's clear to everyone, about 11,500 years ago, the Atlanteans were a warlike people at the end of their civilization, and came into conflict with many other civilizations around the world, even wanting to expand deeper into Europe. Plato even describes the creation of a coalition against these conquerors. The ancient Athenians were on the chinchilla who fought against these Atlanteans, along with many other peoples, who ultimately disappeared in a single day from the face of the earth, as did their entire civilization. Today their structure is poorly archaeologically researched. Limited surface archaeological research was conducted, in which remains of a more primitive civilization were found, meaning various tools and fragments thousands of years old, but no clear structures or buildings. Unfortunately, they have still not been found. If they exist, they are probably hiding deep beneath the sand, as Plato described that Atlantis disappeared due to a huge earthquake and tsunami, under enormous amounts of water, but also mud, as he clearly mentions in his texts a massive mud flood and huge quantities of mud. Considering that it happened about 12,000 years, the only traces after such a long time that could possibly be found are certainly buried very deep underground. Such types of research have not yet been conducted, so such a project would, of course, be incredibly expensive. A diameter of 40 kilometers for this structure and a huge area means that there is a very small chance that you will find something exactly at the spot where you start digging. What actually happened in Atlantis is this mysterious place, and how is it possible that such a powerful kingdom, which had colonies all over the world, simply extinguishes overnight? For me, today we officially know that at that very time, indeed, on the Earth's northern hemisphere, an epic global catastrophe and an event known as Meltwater Pulse 1b occurred. Sudden and drastic climate change, a rapid rise in sea levels of up to 50 meters in some places, enormous lightning, floods, and tsunamis, all in a very short period, where the northern hemisphere suffered the greatest damage. And when I say damage, I mean global destruction of cosmic proportions. And even Africa has not been spared from this enormous tsunami that has devastated northern Africa. This is not just a tsunami. How big was this actually a catastrophe? You can best understand it when you look at today's Sahara and the whole of North Africa, an area of almost 5 by 2, meaning 5,000 kilometers in length and 2,000 in width, transformed from a green oasis full of life, plants, animals, rivers, lakes, and cities that looked like today's Europe, into an endless wasteland that simply has no end. Evo, such was the disaster only in this area of North Africa that, after all, may have swept away even the ancient Atlantis. From the once famous work and kingdom, only this and this eroded circular structure remain today. Of all the possible theories and locations of this place around the planet, I think this structure, considering everything, best fits these ancient stories. Simply put, nothing else is even close, which does not mean that some other places on the shores of the Caribbean, for example, but even ancient Greece were not their colonies, as if the entire Roman Empire had disappeared, and we know very little about it. We simply cannot find the city of Rome. You don't even know where this ancient and famous city is located. But let's say you find Pula in Istria and say that you have found Rome. Yet Pula was only a part of this Roman Empire. Therefore, I believe that many other locations in the world are precisely that. Part of Atlantis as a civilization, while the capital of this kingdom was a huge mystery. With a rare structure, there is a huge possibility that these are actually the foundations and channels of this former city. Do you now understand why this would be a huge problem for the official narrative of our history? Such an advanced civilization, at a time when, based on everything we know so far, such a civilization should not exist. This is yet another advanced civilization. This story incredibly reminds me of today's United States of America. In the distance, a very powerful island and continent that has colonies all over the world and its entire history. Wars across the rest of the planet. If our civilization were to be destroyed overnight, do you think that somehow a story or legend about such a powerful civilization that vanished in flames would survive? Some people believe and go a step further. If Atlantis, along with some other civilizations it waged war against, like the legendary Lemuria, was indeed an advanced civilization, some say they were more advanced than our present-day civilization. Some people believe that the entire global cataclysm that occurred 11 years ago, the pollution of the year, is actually a consequence of a global nuclear war and mutual destruction. That is exactly what would happen even today if a nuclear war were to occur. Within just a few weeks, we would literally return to the Stone Age, with enormous consequences for the entire planet. And some people claim just that Atlantis was actually destroyed in such a global war. The official opinion of today's science is that the cataclysm that occurred 11,500 years ago was triggered by natural processes, either on Earth or they came from Vemira. So what if what we think was natural? What if it was something completely different? The whole of North Africa, along with the rest of the northern hemisphere, was covered with a huge number of impact craters. There are probably many more, but they are completely invisible due to the sand. Some of these craters have incredible symmetry with the eye of the Sahara, as if something had fallen longitudinally on the Richat Structure and continued to bombard kilometers away. And these craters named Tenemer and Temahad. What if I told you that near the Richat Structure there is another very similar structure, called the Semsia Dome, as well as some other smaller domes of similar appearance? Vessels throughout Africa. This is extensive. We will discuss it on another occasion. But only in Africa are there some very interesting geological formations. And some people believe that these were actually the cities of Atlantis, that were built according to similar patterns as the capital. What we know for sure is that it was 11 before. For 500 years, the Earth has endured a huge number of impacts in the Northern Hemisphere, with North America, Greenland, Europe, and North Africa suffering the most. Are these the remnants of natural craters, more comets and asteroids, or words about the consequences of a global war? For some people, it is a huge mystery. Right after this catastrophe and the twilight of our civilization, thousands of years will read what we have again stood up and started to develop once more. And it was precisely there that they played a key role according to numerous stories. The surviving members of this ancient civilization who actually re-established the first cities. And stories and legends about the ancient land were passed down from generation to generation until they reached Solon and Plato. Of course from Egypt, which after such a cataclysm from the former colony of Atlantis, became a completely new civilization with divine and powerful beings, which they called pharaohs. It is completely incredible that all ancient civilizations tell very similar stories. And in my personal opinion, this is not a coincidence. It is believed that there is a fairly large chance that this place is the right place for their main joy, and that the story of Plato is actually a transmission of real historical events from our lost history, which is much older than we thought, which some people still think today. Will we ever know the full truth? Dad, it's really hard because we are actually working with crumbs and fragments from this ancient history. Why? But one day, who knows? Will we end up in the same way as the former Atlanteans? Our civilization will also become a source for some new myths and legends about great and powerful cities that ruled the world and waged wars. Considering that this is almost an unspoken topic, I will definitely return with some new information that I did not mention in today's video. So, thank you all for watching.